Welcome to Good Sex at NYU, a podcast about sex, relationships, health, and mental health in a sex-positive space. So if you're looking for sometimes serious, sometimes funny, and always sex-positive discussions, then you're in the right place. I'm Danielle Elliman, Associate Director of Sexual and Relationship Respect Services at Counseling and Wellness Services. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am April Fellers, a nurse and sexual health educator at the Student Health Center. I also use she, her pronouns. We are two white, cisgender, heterosexual, female-identifying clinicians, one with a medical background and the other with mental health experience, who seek to create a space that is inclusive of all identities, backgrounds, and perspectives.
Today on Good Sex at NYU, we are joined by Meghan Kelley, Counseling and Wellness Services London, and Leen, the Student Life Coordinator. Meghan has worked with NYU students for over 15 years, first as an off-campus therapist in New York City, and as the full-time global wellness counselor at NYU London since September of 2019. Leen has worked at NYU for 2 years as Student Life Coordinator. Her time is spent advising students, organizing cultural trips, and building community at NYU London. Last fall, she spearheaded NYU London's SHAG Day, which is the Sexual Health Awareness and Guidance Day. Thank you both so much for being here and joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about your roles at NYU London and how the students really kind of get connected, and what kind of things that you do with the students in London?
So I'm the full-time global wellness counselor. My colleague, Charlene Norford, is a part-time counselor. She's here Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm here Monday through Friday. We provide individual psychotherapy, referrals to off-campus services, crisis intervention. We have a couple of groups that we've started here. We do a lunch lab group every other week where we talk about common mental health issues and skills to address some of the symptoms. Charlene and our colleague Vinu in Paris have just started an online group supporting students of color who are studying abroad. So quite a lot of things. Students can find us in the counseling center, which is on the third floor of 6 Bedford Square. That information is not going to be helpful after this semester because we are moving to a new building in the summer. So some of the stuff we talk about today will be pertinent just to this semester, and then there'll be some new things. But students can also find us by looking at LDN, which is our dedicated website for London students. And then they can find us through email at nyul.counseling@nyu.edu.
Great.
So I run the Student Affairs Office, which is kind of a hub for all things to do with being a student, which is pretty vague. We're on the ground floor, so if current students want to find us, if you just keep going past reception and turn left. So we do a lot. We do kind of look at the holistic student experience, and I would split that into 3 parts, kind of health and well-being, community, and your cultural experience. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure, you're healthy, you're happy, you're safe, but also you're having your well-rounded London study away experience. So we run a lot of events. These might be on campus, in the dorms, or we'll bring you on trips around the UK, trips to the theatre, stuff like that. And yeah, we are there to support you, accessing healthcare. You've got a whole new healthcare system here, but students here are covered by insurance too. So there's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming. We're there to guide you through that. And the best way to get in touch with us is either to come to the office or to email us at nyul.students@nyu.edu.
That's great. Really helpful to know. You guys are doing so much. I think it is such a interesting experience to get to be in college and to experience a new culture while you're doing that. I didn't have that opportunity, and it's it's just such a, I think, enriching opportunity. But it can also have some challenges to it. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to, some more about what the London campus is like, maybe some cultural adjustments that you notice that students experience, and maybe what some students might consider when they're going to London.
So I think, there are lots of differences and lots of similarities. London is a big city like New York, hugely diverse, lots of things to do, which in some ways can be really exciting, in other ways can be really overwhelming. I think sometimes people feel when they study abroad that they are carrying the excitement of all the people who have said to them, you're going to have the best semester ever. And sometimes it feels like it can be helpful to be reminded that sometimes it's okay to just, lie in bed and watch Netflix for an afternoon. Mm-hmm. In terms of what's available for students, in terms of the differences between London and New York, there are lots of little differences, like phrases are different. Like the elevator is the lift, mm-hmm. and the trash is the rubbish. Cars drive on the other side of the road. These are, small things that people get used to. Then I think there are some differences in terms of comfort things. One thing that really stood out to me was you can buy Doritos here, but they're not the same Doritos as you can buy in the US. So I think it's important to remember that even though the language is similar, or the language is the same, and a lot of the cultural aspects are similar, it's not the same place. I think sometimes people come to London and feel like, oh, it'll be just like New York. Mm-hmm. And it's not. And I think that that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I love that you point out some of the food differences, because I think there is like an assumption that, it's the same. But mm-hmm. I remember I lived abroad, not in a summer abroad, and I couldn't get peanut butter. And I was like, I forgot how much I loved peanut butter. And I was like mm-hmm. craving it all of the time. So if Doritos is something that, you're going to crave, maybe that's a little care package that you need to have your family or friends send you if that's something that you're missing from home.
Yeah. It also gives the opportunity, though, to learn about all sorts of new snacks, is what we're talking about, snacks, but also new other things. I have developed a strong affinity for cheesy Whatsits, which are, it's a new thing for me. But, we're talking about that as snacks is like one thing, but thinking about that as a much larger mm-hmm. idea of, you like this in New York, well, maybe you like this other thing that is similar but not the same. But there are so many different opportunities to try new things here, which can be, again, really exciting and sometimes a bit overwhelming, I think.
Yeah. Are there some other things that you feel like is important for students to know when they're going to London? Any cultural differences around dating or sex?
Well, just to say that homesickness is a very common experience. Mm-hmm. I think that, people think some people get it, some people don't. Most people get it.
I think so.
And it is the little things like that, the comforts of home, like little food, snacks and different things. Specifically around dating, it's hard for us to have the comparison point, really. We rely on student anecdotal data, or I do at least, but I don't know that it's that different to New York in particular. Maybe if you were to compare it to the US on a whole, you would find these differences between the UK and the US, but London being a big city like New York, it has a big dating culture and a big hookup culture. Apps are a huge part of dating. What I kind of see is a lot of students who, because they're studying abroad, they're more willing to try new things. You kind of have this cloak of anonymity and you get to try on a different kind of identity or a new character. And dating is a way you can do that. And also we do, like, our student population, we have about 100 freshman students. So for them, it's not just their first time in a new country, it's their first time at college.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
We see a lot of newness and self-discovery, I guess, is what you could call it. It can just be very freeing for students to date here. I also think it's a great way to have a cultural exchange. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we get from students, and it's not necessarily a complaint, but it's sort of a regret, is that they didn't get to make more UK-based friends. You're here for a short amount of time. You have your cozy NYU group, but it can be quite hard to make native local friends wherever you go in the world. But one way that's pretty easy to do that is to meet someone from a dating app. And yeah, it can be a cultural exchange. I mean, anything can be a cultural exchange, but I always think of that scene in Love Actually where they start naming things like bottle. It's a great way to learn about what the UK is like.
And is that also part of your job? As someone in student life, do you help them not only connect with the NYU folks? Are there cultural experiences where you're connecting them with, events or local experiences?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So we try to link in with events, particularly with UCL, University College London, which is our neighbouring university. We buy our students memberships to their clubs and societies, to their students' unions, so they can access clubs and societies. So that is a way that we try to help students meet. It's hard to put a term on it because you say locals or British students, but I mean, students at any university in the world are global, international. So, it's hard to kind of pin down what you mean. I guess you mean someone who lives in the UK for longer than one semester. But yeah, that's how some students meet people. We also have external residences, which will have, a more diverse mixture of students in there as opposed to the NYU owned residences. So students meet people there, but the kind of lasting friendships are the ones that, we hear a lot about. Students have found in their own special ways. So whether that's that they found some community themselves based on an interest, a sport, they've just put themselves out there.
Yeah,
one student, this must be, can't remember, is it a year ago? One student worked in a Wetherspoons. A Wetherspoons is Wetherspoons is a chain of pubs in the UK. It's super cheap and quite quintessential British culture. Yeah, and I think she had a great experience because she was working alongside English people. She was serving food and drink to English people. And yeah, definitely working is a good way to get integrated as well.
Well, that's helpful to know because I didn't realize that they could actually work.
It depends on your visa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to get a specific visa in order to be able to work.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Good to know, though.
I think also that's a big thing to mention in terms of differences, that the drinking age in the UK is 18. And so for students who are starting university, they may not have had experience with alcohol before because they maybe have just turning 18. And also students who have been in New York up until they turn 20, perhaps have not been able to go out to and consume alcohol in public legally. I think one of the things that I really like a lot about the UK is pub culture, where you go to a pub and you don't drinking is not mandatory to be part of pub culture, but it is a way to sort of be out, sort of like in your living room, but out, where people do all sorts of things, play games, and there are pub quizzes and pub events, and you can really find a sense of community in those spaces as well. I think sometimes students feel a bit like, well, if I'm going out, I need to go out and do a specific set of activities, but actually there's so many things that are possible. And I think, Aisling, you might be able to speak to this a bit more, but in terms of university pub culture, I think it's so built into the UK that, actually UCL has a pub in their physics building, I think.
They have a few bars, yeah.
In their academic centers, that's how part of the culture it is. And the alcohol is part of it, but really it's more, I think, much more the building of community. So in terms of where students can meet other students to date or just to know each other, pubs are another great place to do that.
Yeah, that's great that it's kind of an extension of your living room and that you can go there and not have the pressure to drink, because I think that there's a lot of pressure to, go out and, drink. But here it's like, well, hey, you just be here and participate in the activity. But I also think, just to go back to the age, that difference is, I think, really important because I think even, growing up in the US, there's this forbidden thing that we can't do. And I think my experience in Europe in general, but maybe, you can speak a little bit more to what that's like in the UK, is that like, it's not as, I don't know, it's just a little bit different, the drinking culture. Like it's kind of normalized in some ways, which can be good and bad. But it's not as if like I've seen like families that like will let their 16-year-olds like have a drink. And so it's not as forbidden culture, forbidden within the culture. I'm wondering if you have thoughts around that, or if there's like anything to note around that.
Well, I grew up in US culture. And so I think, Aisling, you grew up in a different culture, so maybe you could speak to that more accurately.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Ireland, which would be pretty similar in terms of culture, drinking culture anyway, to Britain, in that the drinking age is 18. And I mean, it depends on your family. It depends on who you happen to be friends with. Some people start drinking significantly younger than 18. Mm-hmm. But by the time you reach 17, 18, it feels as though everyone is drinking. Mm. And yeah, I don't know what's good or what's bad or what's recommended, but I think, compared to maybe a sophomore or junior coming from the US who's 20 years old, Irish and British people may have gotten things out of their system and have a more mature relationship, I guess. Or, I think with drinking, it's a bit of trial and error. Mm-hmm. Obviously, trying to be as safe as you can. And you need to learn what's your limit, what you like, what you want to do, what's interesting to you, what's not interesting to you. So, I mean, I guess we don't see our students drink either, luckily. And that's not something we really do with them, but we hear about it afterwards. And it does sound like our students are relatively measured and safe and sensible. But yeah, it's this idea of anything being taboo, especially when you're, not 18, but like 20, 21. Mm-hmm. It's quite bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you answering that for me. I just think it's interesting to think about like some of these cultural differences. And I think maybe I have, or like I'm always trying to like understand and navigate some of the myths that I carry in. And I think that like I think about, British culture, things that I go, and to me, it seems like they have a really heavy drinking culture. I hear about the pubs and I think about, they must have a really high tolerance. There must be a huge drinking culture. I don't know if that's true. It's been a really long time since I've been to London. So I'm wondering, if you can share with us like some additional myths around any of like, not just drinking, but like other cultural myths that you think exist that would be helpful for us to name and to talk about, to process a little bit more.
I mean, I wouldn't say that there isn't a big drinking culture here. I think that is true. But I think that it is so much more normalized than it is in the US. I think the idea of, going to the pub after work, yes, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that everybody gets hammered. I think that means that people, as we were saying, have a different kind of relationship with alcohol, where it's like, oh yeah, this is just something that's part of what we do. It is not the only thing that we do. And I think that sometimes, because it is taboo in the US, it can feel like once you have access to it, that's the only thing that's interesting. So I agree with you. It is a big thing, but it's not the only thing. Mm-hmm. In terms of other myths, I think people might think that British society is pretty conservative and like formal, and you need to like sit with your hands folded and like that kind of thing. And while there are aspects to that, I think on the other side, sexuality is also a big part of British culture and British humor in a way that it's not in the US. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think of specific examples for this. And the one thing that I could come up with, which is silly, but the word tidbit, that is an American version of the word titbit. It means the same thing. But in the US, it's like, you wouldn't say titbit because then you're saying tit. Mm-hmm. And that makes everybody anxious. But here you can say it and people are like, oh yeah, it's just an expression. Yeah. So, and I think there's a lot of comedy that's really quite sexual indeed, or, references sexual stuff in a way that would be censored in the US. You can say 4-letter words on TV after 9:00. And again, these are like silly examples, but they really, I think, are symbols of a larger culture of maybe more acceptance and slightly less anxiety about sexuality than one might encounter in the US.
Well, it also fosters conversations around it, right? Like if you're seeing it in media in a different way, then you're allowed to talk about it when you're potentially going to engage in it, right? Like I feel like that's one of the reasons why we started this podcast is because, we don't always have conversations about sex and unpacking some of these things. So I really think that's important to know. Like you're going to see that in, various different cultures as well. But it's good to know that this is, something that they'll see in media, in comedy, in various different places in the UK. So,
yeah. I think another thing we were talking about before we started was the accessibility of birth control and like morning after pill. Just sexual health, I think, is accessible in a way in the UK that is not in the US. Part of that has to do with just the insurance of the National Health Service, which is free to everyone, and also the health insurance that the health insurance that students have. Ashley is more familiar with it, but we were just talking about some things have a small cost, but what's Sexual Health London? I mean, that was amazing still. What is that service?
So Sexual Health London is a service in London for anyone who lives in London. The one kind of disclaimer is that you need to have a UK phone number, a UK mobile phone number to access this. And we offer SIM cards to all of our students, so that shouldn't be a problem. But the website is shl.uk, and you can access a range of services there without, needing to visit the sexual health clinic. It's all online. So you can order an at-home STI kit, which will come with a swab and a finger prick and tests for chlamydia, gonorrhea, HIV, and syphilis, I think.
Wow.
Tests for 4 anyway. And it's just super handy, super discreet as well, the way it's packaged. And you'll get your results in maybe 3 to 5 days once you return it, free postage. Also, they have some other services. I think you can order emergency contraceptive through shl.uk, in which case it will be free. If you buy it in the pharmacy, it can range in price from, I've seen it anywhere from £7 to £30, which still is probably a lot more accessible than you would find in the US.
I was just thinking, I think last time I priced it, it was like $50 in the pharmacy.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm making a surprise today, but
that's why I'm over here surprised, £7. I know that there's a difference in the currency, but still a lot cheaper. Yeah. And to get it for free even is amazing. So I think I need a semester abroad.
Come on over.
Also to say, if you do your STI test and you test positive for something, you will get that medication sent to you in the post as well for free. So it really breaks down a lot of barriers, makes things so easy because, no matter how much of this we do, unfortunately, still people will have their own shame and obstacles to accessing services. And I think SHL do a really good job of making it really as easy and accessible as it can be.
That's great. So are there other cultural things that we need to talk about in regards to dating or sex when we think about our students going to NYU London?
I think one thing that's really common is students being in long distance relationships when they come to a study abroad site. And when I say common, I couldn't give you statistics, but I think it's something that we hear about pretty frequently. And that brings with it a whole host of challenges. How do you stay connected? When do you communicate? Especially if there's a big time difference. How do you express sexuality and affection with someone when you're on different continents? These are all things that I think I certainly hear about in counseling, and I imagine you probably hear about even more when you're talking with students, just sort of on a casual basis about what they're doing.
Yeah, anecdotally, a lot of students, have partners at home or not even at home, because usually, their significant others also at university, so they could be anywhere in the States or also studying abroad somewhere. And for me, it's quite interesting because I think in, European culture, I don't know if people be that willing to hold on to something. I think you know, in European culture, you see your study abroad as kind of your really, really go wild in free time. Mm-hmm. So most people would detangle themselves or detach themselves. So it's quite sweet, you know, really to see students being committed to something and seeing how they describe their boyfriend or girlfriend or partner to their friends who have never met them. And often the partner will visit at some point and, you know, everyone's looking forward to meeting this person. It's quite exciting. But yeah, like Meghan said, I'm so curious as to how they keep up the contact and, you know, the intimacy as well when you're in a dorm room. This is something that's, as an Irish person, really quite a culture shock for me to see students share rooms, because it's not very common in British and Irish universities.
Oh, okay.
Everyone will, for the most part, will stay in single rooms in a shared flat or a shared house, but single rooms are very, very common. And, you know, I think that is a good thing when you're at an age of exploring your sexuality. It's not something that tends to come up with students. I guess it's not something people are that forthcoming with, but I'm so curious as to how they manage to have sex lives, you know, whether in London or virtually while sharing rooms.
Yeah. Well, they actually say that that can be sometimes a problem when it comes to, you know, power dynamics in the US, like especially in university culture, because there are often times where, you know, you're an upperclassman and they have their own like room, they have their own apartment, and so like you just want a little bit of privacy, not even to have sex. And so you go back to a room that's a single just to like talk and chat. And then there's like assumptions or things that go along with that. And there might not be as much safety. And so what does that look like, you know, when it comes to living abroad or, you know, again, not being able to explore that, but also not being able to talk to a long distance partner, not being able to masturbate, you know, just not being able to have your own like time to yourself. Because at any point, like your roommate's going to like pop in and be annoying or be lovely, right? Like I think one of the things
there,
but be present.
Yeah.
But just be there, right? Like how do you sit with and process your own thoughts when you're on your own? And I think that's really, important for not just study abroad students, for all students. But I think one of the things I'm really hearing you all talk about, I mean, whether it's like with alcohol or whether with a long distance relationship, is really the exploration of boundaries, right? Because I think that we have to think about these long distance relationships. How is it going to work? You know, and what do I need? How do I get my needs met? Can I masturbate? Or are there some exceptions? Are we going to allow for some of that, you know, a little bit of exploration while I'm, you know, studying away? Like, can I have some sex? No, like, you know, emotional intimacy, or maybe that's completely, you know, it's completely monogamous and we're going to hold to that. And that's lovely too. But like, how do we navigate this when there's, you know, miles and miles and time zones that we're contending with. But I think that that's something that we're all struggling with throughout our journeys, is how do we navigate the shifting boundaries? But I think there's definitely some specific things to think about when it comes to, you know, studying away. Yeah. And what are some tips that you can give to students who are coming to NYU London for helping to adjust and to navigate this new experience and how to understand what's going on around them?
I think be as open and accessible to experiences as you can, meaning there's lots of cultural programming, there's lots of opportunity here. And so letting yourself take advantage of a lot of that, I think, is really useful. In the context of long distance relationships, I think we have heard some students say, well, I would go out to the clubs, but my partner wouldn't like it if I did that, or I wouldn't be able to speak with my partner. And having those barriers in the way sometimes, I think, keeps people from having just a more full experience being here. But having said that, there's so many things to do. And I think engaging in as many things that are interesting is really useful. Being outside of central London sometimes also is pretty nice. It's, Central London is a city, the public transportation here, again, I say this as someone from the US, is extraordinarily wonderful. You can get on a train and be at the ocean in an hour. Sort of like I was thinking about going from Tandon to Washington Square. It's not quite as quick as that, but it's pretty quick. And you're like in a completely different place, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. I feel like I'm at risk of saying, here are all the things I like about London. So I'm going to stop now and say, Ashley, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, and sometimes you feel like, you're the old person and the students are the young people. You just need to value the in-person stuff. And that can be, saying yes to things, going to the club, obviously with respect to your own, what you want to do and not want to do. But yeah, some of my kind of obvious tips are not spending too much time underground. The tube system is fantastic, but you see a lot more of a city if you walk, cycle, take the bus. If you take the double-decker bus and sit on the front, you've got this like huge view. Yeah. And that's something I learned from my study abroad. I studied abroad in Paris, and I remember about halfway through, I got a taxi because I was moving residences, and I was like, I had no idea that was beside that, because I would just go underground and reappear. And it's so nice to get to know a city by walking. And London, central London for the most part, is walkable. But yeah, as well of the kind of in-person versus virtual experience, I feel a lot of people have kind of Instagram goals. You want to go to Paris and get the photo, and I'm not going to be able to convince anyone that that's not important if it is important to them, but it's about finding some balance and just putting your phone away sometimes, I think. Keeping a journal, I think, is a really important thing to do when you're studying abroad. You'll always have photos to look back on, but you want to remember how you felt and, what kind of things you were thinking about.
I love that. Just FYI, I think like in general, like good advice, put your phone away and not just take the photo to show people, right? Like I think when I travel, I love walking, like again, naming that, but also sometimes I'll take a photo just because I want to remember that moment, and it has nothing to do with like a social media post. I was recently in Portugal, and my sister and I were there, and we were walking backwards up a hill because we were just tired because there's so many hills. We were like walking backwards up a hill, and we're like, we're going to use different muscles, and we're walking, and I'm like, I want a photo of this. It's a terrible photo. Like, I wouldn't post that just because it's a terrible photo. It's because like it's blurry, it's night, like it's just not a great. But I'm going to look back on that photo and be like, we were walking backwards up a hill, right? So like, why are we taking the photo? Is it just for social media? Is it to show that our life is great? When like internally, like we have to like do some work because maybe we're like just showing what we want other people to think about our life instead of really sort of embracing the moments and doing things in person. So I really love that for advice.
I think so. And I think there's this thing about, going slow and not trying to pack everything in, because the more you try to pack in and rush and panic, the quicker the time goes. And it's like a scarcity mindset thing, that if you feel like, oh my God, I've only got 3 months to do XYZ, or you can say, I have 3 months to do anything. It's as much time. You'll get a lot of advice. Like Meghan said, you get people who are so excited for you to be in London, and they say, you should do this, 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 and this. You should go to Rome and eat in this exact restaurant. Maybe when you go to Rome, you stumble across a restaurant that catches your eye. You can't do everything.
And maybe you might think about, I'm going to have an afternoon every couple of weeks where I'm not going to make any plans, and I'm just going to wander around and see what I come upon. I mean, London particularly is such a great place to wander around and follow, like, oh, here's this little alley. I'm going to go down that alley and see what I come upon, because there are so many little alleys and they lead to such interesting places. I think, just like Aisling was saying, sometimes students feel like, okay, I have this amount of time. Here are the landmarks I need to hit. So how do I get that done? Which really, I think, deprives people of the experience of, I'm just going to get lost. I mean, when was the last time we got lost? Because we don't ever have to be lost anymore.
Yeah.
But just having the experience of like, I'm just going to wander around and see what happens. Which I think for some people can feel a little bit intimidating, but pretty fun.
I love getting lost in the city. Yeah. I also really love finding my like coffee shop. If I lived here, where would I like be? You know, like that's my experience when I travel. And I think it's great to like put that spin of you have 3 months. That's a lot. Like most people might travel to London for like a week, 2 weeks tops. Exactly. And so it's like you have time, pace yourself. Like don't just try to fit everything in the first like moments.
I think that's one of the things about study abroad that's so amazing. Sorry, I cut you off, but I think sometimes people think about it as a vacation, but this is, you're actually living here. Like you need to figure out what groceries you want and like which coffee shop do you want? And if you are going to do your own laundry, you're going to send it to the laundromat or, you know, and which of the things that you can encounter do you like the best and do you want to go back to? Because there is all this time. So letting yourself really sort of explore that. And one other thing I think that's really interesting about this, and I think you alluded to this earlier, is this is a set amount of time. So if you want to explore something, explore a different part of yourself, like you can put it on knowing that at the end of this time, you can take it off again, or you can keep it on depending on what you want to do. It's such an exact period of time. Like this semester, people arrived on January 18th, right? And they leave on May 11th. What do you want to do with that time?
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a good opportunity.
You do see students, sorry, Danielle.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, you see students, you know, dye their hair, get a piercing, get a tattoo. These might seem like big things, but they are. I think when you're in that age bracket, I think the really monumental things, and, you know, you can feel some freedom when you're that bit further from home.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of studying abroad is going back. And having to face, you know, your parents with your thing. I just think it's really, really important, you know, to have this opportunity to not go wild, but you know,
where you are.
Do different things.
Yeah, to really sort of get to know yourself and try on new things. And I think that comes with like dating and sex as well. Like I think being adventurous and trying, you know, new things, you know, keeping your boundaries, but also sort of naming, oh, like this is an opportunity for me to, you know, do something different and to go out and find something, you know, that I wouldn't normally do in my normal like comfort zone. And so I think like we all need that, like when, you know, sometimes it's going abroad that gives you the space and the opportunity, but like, you know, it's helpful for all of us to get out of our comfort zone every once in a while and push ourselves a little bit. Like our boundaries are really helpful and useful, but sometimes we need to push them a little bit so we can like explore what really do I want? Like, is this a boundary that like society has says that I need to like hold to? Is this something that my family has said, or is this something that I really, really want? Is this for me? You know, so really sort of pushing them so you know what you really want. And I think that's exactly what you're saying to me is like, you know, sometimes being in a new environment, studying in a new like culture helps you forces you to like, you have to figure out your groceries. You have to figure out how to like navigate the world. And so that's pushing you a little bit. So you pushing in other areas too. So I really like that. You know, I was in the Peace Corps. And so that's what was my like pushing abroad. Like I didn't study abroad, but it really sort of helped me also just get a broader understanding of the world. You know, what does it look like from, you know, from London, I was in Romania. So what does it look like, you know, in these different spaces? And so it's interesting to be, you know, looking at the world through a new lens. And I love that NYU has all these programs to, you know, help our students explore that. Can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, you spoke a little bit about it before. You talked about some of the great healthcare benefits of being in the UK. But, you know, if someone does experience sexual assault or relationship violence, can you share a little bit more about how they might get access to resources in the UK? Because I think sometimes it's a little, you know, confusing. It's confusing here. So I think it's confusing no matter like where you are, but like to be in a foreign place, different country, what does that look like? If you can share that, I think that would be helpful.
Do you want to start with the the thing you were telling me about earlier?
What were you telling me about?
The Haven? What is it called?
You told me about that.
Oh, right. I can tell my notes.
Yeah, no, that's your notes.
I thought you said, oh yeah, and this other thing that we have, which is great. Okay, never mind.
No. Sorry.
No worries.
Meghan.
Okay, here we go. Let me take my glasses off for continuity. So in addition to counseling and wellness services, which are available here, the Havens is a sexual assault referral center, which is there to support anyone who has been recently raped or sexually assaulted. It's free and it's confidential, and it offers special support for young people, examinations for collection of evidence if that's necessary, and for testing for sexually transmitted diseases or infections. You know what? Let me do this again because I feel like I'm being like, let me read you the report.
Go ahead.
So we have obviously counseling and wellness services on site. We provide 24-hour support. So if somebody needed support, something happens when they're on their way home from someplace or something, we have ways to support people both on the phone and in person. Also, there's a place called The Havens, which is a sexual assault referral center where students can go to both find information about how, they might need to be tested. They will do testing there, talk about support and other resources that could be available if someone needs them.
That's great. Glad to know. They also have a student health center, or do you if someone were to come in just with some concerns about an STI, and again, it sounds like there's some great resources, but if someone were to come in and say, "Oh, I'm concerned about this," do you directly link them to the UK services, or is there someone on site? I don't know how that works.
So we don't have medical care on site. We do have a lot of resources, though. Okay. We have both the NHS resources and also private care.
Okay.
So if someone came in and said they'd like to see a physician about something, we would help them go to either the Harley Street Health Center, which is a private facility where we send people for just general medical care, or through the NHS, if that was more appropriate, depending on what their preferences are. Also, there's some urgent care options that are private. And also the NHS emergency healthcare system. So it really depends on the urgency, and it all is free because GeoBlue covers everything that is private, and the NHS covers everything else. So really, it's about how urgent it is, and wait times, and where people want to go geographically. But we have, again, in our internal webpage, LDN, we have listed, is it urgent? Do you need to be seen right now? Is it an emergency? Is it something that you can make an appointment for? And we have all sorts of resources for, the spectrum of concerns that people might have.
Yeah, that's great. And they can call wellness exchange number there in order to just kind of help guide through this. Because when something has happened, you kind of forget all these resources, but I think it's always good to have someplace to direct folks to when they're in that kind of a crisis state.
We have a number that is sort of the universal number for NYU London. It's an 800 number. So people, even if people don't have international calling, they can call this number. And I think it has 6 options. One option is the healthcare center, or our primary GP service. One option is the NYU London duty phone. There's always someone on call. So if somebody needs to speak with someone, they can speak with them 24 hours a day. One option is connecting to the wellness exchange. One option is connecting to the student affairs office. So once students have that one number, which is 0800-316-0469, I think. I'll check, but I think that's what it is. Anyway, they can it's on their website too. It's very easy to find. But then they can have access to all of these services 24 hours a day.
That's great. That's great. And are there other people that students should know in the London Global site, or anything else that you feel like would be helpful for students to know about?
So students will meet their peer mentors when they arrive. These are students who may have trained as RAs in the US or may not, but they are sort of, how would you describe peer mentors?
They are residence-based, peer support, I guess. Okay. We do things a little differently to the RA system in New York, just because it's important that these people also get to enjoy their time abroad. We like to take some of the pressure off, but they are there for community building and peer support, I would say. We also have global equity fellows. So we're not going to give you names because these positions have different students in them semester to semester. But the Global Equity Fellows similarly provide peer support and kind of advocacy, I guess, that they'll advocate on the part of the student, specifically around GID, BEA issues.
Okay.
And then Nigel Freeman, who's the Associate Director of Student Life, is an important person to know. Amy Rowe, who is the Associate Director of Academics, an important person to know. Kate Atwell is the Senior Program Manager on the academics team. If anybody has any questions about their visas, Kate is the person to talk to about them. And then just the rest of us, we're, a relatively cheerful group of people. And we're always very excited when new students come and we all want to meet them. And so they should know all of us.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, thank you both so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. And, I think that it's always helpful to hear, from people on the ground. I can, talk about all these different issues, but I can't provide that insight into what it's like to be in London. And just so folks know that my services and the sexual and relationship respect services are available to students in the London site, but actually all of our global sites. I will get referrals from Meghan, or I'll get referrals from different spaces, and I will meet with them for 1 or 2 sessions to talk about Title IX. I don't know, some of the ins and outs of reporting to police, but, I'm definitely here to support students as they're navigating some of the, difficulties if they do experience harm. So just to sort of put that out there, that I'm a resource. Me and my team here, we can't, do therapy with people, internationally because of licensing issues, but just meeting with them 1 or 2 times to sort of explain some of their rights and resources within the university can also be really helpful. But I really appreciate your time. I just want to ask if there's anything else that you want to share with our listeners before we end today.
Nothing in particular, except to say, on that vein, that students can come to any staff in NYU. The student life team, student affairs, obviously might seem the obvious people to approach, but academics as well. If you turn to anyone, you will be pointed in the right direction for support, if not directly supported. And we want to know what's going on. We want to know how we can help. So please, don't hesitate to contact us if you're a student and there's anything you need.
And also, we want to tell you all the stuff we love about London. So while we were talking about resources, it's really important to know all the resources. And if you scratch the surface of what do you like here, you'll have a lot of information that's really exciting.
Yeah. Again, you've convinced me. I'm ready for my study abroad in London.
Come on over.
All right. Thank you guys both so much for being here. And yeah, I guess the end. Thanks so much for your patience today.
If you have questions about the podcast or anything we talked about today, please feel free to reach out to us at goodsex.podcast@nyu.edu. This email address is monitored during business hours and may take 3 to 4 days for follow-up. We are definitely open to critical and thoughtful feedback, as we didn't cover everything in this episode and might have said something that was inaccurate or that had a negative impact on someone. If you have questions about your sexual health and are an NYU student, you can connect with our Student Health Center sex expert at sexpert@nyu.edu or schedule an appointment through the Student Health Center portal. Look at our show notes for additional information and resources, including organizations, articles, books, and videos.
If you have urgent mental health concerns, safety issues, or you are worried that someone might have caused harm to you, or that you might have caused harm to someone, then you can contact NYU's Confidential Wellness Exchange at 212-443-9999. Chat with them using their mobile app or email them at wellness.exchange@nyu.edu. For anyone, NYU or non-NYU listeners, you can call the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233, or the National Mental Health Hotline. Simply dial 988 from anywhere in the U.S.
Thanks for listening, and tune in to our next episode where we continue to talk about good sex at NYU. Subscribe to the podcast to hear all of our quickies and interviews with NYU community members. Thanks to our content contributors for this episode, Bernadette Kerr, Alyssa LaFosse, Dr. Dominic Vaini-Amisa, Zoe Raguzios, and to our health promotion team, Anna Genova, Jenny Mellum, Parade Stone, and Arna Dixit, and to Gotham Studios and Karen Ortman.